In breaking news this afternoon, the Israel Defence Force has been warning Palestinian civilians to leave parts of Rafah in southern Gaza as there are expectations of a new ground invasion. The IDF is shifting people to a humanitarian encampment with at least 100,000 people expected to be moved away in the coming hours. Let me welcome onto the set now another former Army man, a British Army commander in the Middle East, Richard Kemp. Good to talk to you, Richard.
Likewise, thank you.
Welcome to Australia. I know you're familiar with this country and join our discussions often, but this is your theatre of expertise, military operations in the Middle East. With that breaking news, can you tell us why the IDF has to go into Rafah?
Yeah, I mean, as you will know and your viewers will know, the IDF has cleared most of Gaza of Hamas-formed organisations. That doesn't mean to say there aren't individual and small groups of Hamas terrorists still in the rest of Gaza, but there are a number of formed units remaining in Rafah. And an Israeli government minister, member of the War Cabinet, General Benny Gantz, said, you can't put out 80% of a fire, you've got to put out 100%. So in other words, the IDF have got to go into Rafah and they've got to destroy the Hamas elements in there before they can achieve a proper victory over Hamas. And it's an inevitability, and it really should have happened before, but there's been so many pressures on Israel in the recent weeks and months that they've been delayed.
Let's go back to basic principles then. The war can't end till Hamas is either completely defeated or surrenders, right? Right.
They've got to be defeated by either killing them or capturing them, and many Hamas terrorists have surrendered to the IDF, or they somehow withdraw and leave Gaza, or they surrender. And I think the most likely option there is a combination of killing, capturing and driving some out.
And is there any other way to achieve that without a ground incursion into Rafah and presumably the tunnels underneath it?
There isn't, no. The Americans have been trying to pressure the IDF into not going in large numbers into Rafah, but carrying out special forces raids into Rafah to deal with some of the high-level terrorists there. But that is simply not going to be enough. They have to be defeated in detail, and that can only be done on the ground. The great danger, of course, of that is killing large numbers of civilians. There are a lot in there, which is why the IDF are trying to push them out to the humanitarian areas. But the IDF are very expert and have achieved phenomenal results so far, despite what you see in many media programmes, phenomenal results at destroying Hamas while minimising civilian casualties.
Well, that's the important point, while minimising. This is a very unusual war. We know that in all war, there tragically are civilian casualties. But we are seeing there are pauses in this war to allow civilians to move. There's a warning now, for instance, for civilians to move out of certain areas, East Rafah, so that the operation can begin. It seems the war is proceeding very carefully to minimise civilian casualties, yet so much of the information coming out of Gaza and circulated globally is that there's almost carpet bombing of civilians. Explain to us the reality versus the information we're getting.
Yeah, I've been into Gaza many times during this conflict on the ground with the IDF. I've seen the way they operate, and they are extremely careful, both in air operations, which are very precisely targeted, with very high levels of authorisation required if there's a high likelihood of killing large numbers of civilians or a possibility of doing so. And on the ground as well, soldiers even sacrifice and risk their own lives to minimise the deaths of innocent civilians. I attended a command group meeting in Gaza of a number of IDF generals discussing a forthcoming operation. And the operation involved taking out a significant Hamas target that was adjacent to a school being used for refugees. The IDF spent about a third of the entire operational meeting trying to figure out how to minimise civilian casualties and came up with actually a pretty imaginative solution for doing so. It's the opposite of what we hear so often.
Are Hamas still inflicting damage on Israel or on the IDF? Are they hitting back or are they just bunkering down?
By and large, Hamas are, when they come up against the IDF, they either surrender, they run away or they get killed, by and large, not exclusively. But that doesn't mean they're finished. And I think it was only yesterday we saw a mortar attack launched at Keren Shalom crossing point in the southern part of Gaza, where humanitarian aid is delivered. A mortar attack launched against this crossing point, which killed 3 IDF soldiers. And of course, you know, this is not unusual for Hamas. They've frequently in the past targeted humanitarian aid deliveries.
How long till it's over?
Well, that's a $50 billion question. But I would say if they initiate the offensive against Rafah, let's say in the next few days, we're talking probably about a good 3-4 weeks before they've made real ground on clearing it. And I think once they've cleared that, we're then into the end of the high-intensity conflict period. But it will require a lot of mopping up, a lot of clearing, a lot of destruction of tunnels and infrastructure, and I think a constant IDF presence inside Gaza to suppress any further uprising of Hamas.
Richard Kemp, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.